Hello Marines, Captain DiPietro here from the Marine Corps Detachment of Fort Benning. Welcome back to the Fitness Report lessons. This is going to be lesson 2 on your RS duties, so your reporting senior duties. If you haven't watched lesson 1 on the MROW yet, then be sure to do that. So today we're going to go through a couple topics. We're going to conduct a fitness report walkthrough. If you watched lesson 1 already, and this is going to look very familiar with a few additions, so we're going to do the same thing we did with the MROW with the fitness report. We're going to talk about relative value. I'm going to give you some tips and tricks how to work relative value as an RS, and if you are a Marine being reported on, maybe some things you haven't thought about if you don't understand relative value or how it works. And then we're going to talk about some things that you as the RS should owe to the RO, because even though you are not responsible for the RO comments, it's a good thing for you, especially if you want to try to take care of your Marines, to offer some suggestions or some bullet points to the RO so that they can provide the best RO comments possible. So let's get started. Again, you've seen most of this before on the MROW lesson. I've added the green topics here. Those are the things that are going to be different from the MROW to the fitness report. So as you look through this, just note I'm going to go over everything, but the green items are the new ones. So all of the black items are going to come directly from the MROW that your Marine provided to you. So administrative information, their name, ID, date of rank, all these things. You as the RS are going to get all those from your MROW, or at least you should get them from the MROW. But it's your responsibility to ensure that they're correct. So back on the MROW lesson, we talked about items like the date of rank, the occasion, the dates. They might be off from what they should be based on what the MRO gave you. So you as the RS, make sure you go through those, check out the dates, ensure that there's no date gaps, make sure that the qualifications, PFT, CFT, all took place during that reporting period. These are all RS responsibilities. So got it, you can get pissed off all you want at the Marines for giving you incorrect information, but if you go forward with that information, if you just take what they give you and assume that it's correct and you give it forward, well, now it's your fault as the RS. So ensure that you check all these things out, but all the items in black and red are going to be given to you from the MROW. In section A, so in the administrative information, the 3 items that are not going to be given from the MROW are going to be the special cases, the Marine is the subject of, and the recommendation for promotion. So be sure you read the PES manual about each one of these. I'm not going to dive into them too much, but ensure that you know what's going on with adverse fitness reports, with non-observed fitness reports. For the subject of, make sure you have appropriate documentation and you know what you're doing with regard to directed and additional comments. If they're the subject of commendatory material, if they're the subject of derogatory material, ensure that you read up on that. And then recommended for promotion, ensure you understand that yes and no, they mean certain things, and if you provide a yes, you have to talk to why you say yes, and if you provide no, then it's going to be an adverse fitness report, so you have to make sure you talk to that later on in your report. And then if it's a grade change report, that recommendation for promotion is going to be not applicable. So ensure you read up on the PES and know what all those things mean. Then moving down to billet description. So back in the MROW, we talked, this is going to come directly from initial counseling. So ensure that they match up the way that you want it as the RS. You should have given that billet description to the Marines, so it shouldn't be any issue, but maybe they added something that you didn't put in the initial counseling and you say, hey, that's a really good addition, I like having that, so let me rearrange the billet description a little bit. Or maybe they changed it more than you wanted and you want to revert back to the initial billet description. So just ensure that's accurate and reads exactly how you want it to as the RS. And then major accomplishments. So in the MROW section, we talked about you as the Marine being reported on, you want to make that sound as good as possible. You want to put every little thing in there that you can to make yourself look like a more competitive Marine. But you as the RS, now this is your chance to kind of filter through that and see which of it's true, which of it's maybe a little exaggerated, or maybe some stuff that the Marine didn't think about that you believe should belong on their report. So that's your duty as the RS, to take their major accomplishments, make it sound what you want it to, maybe a little bit better, maybe not as great, and provide that on the finished report. So where you really begin as the RS, and this is the heavy part of the fitness report that we all get caught up in, and appropriately so, because this is going to have a major impact on boards and promotions and things, is going to be the traits and the score section. So this is going to be items D through H on the fitness report, and these are the things like professionalism or proficiency and then developing subordinates, those kind of tasks and traits that we want to grade the Marine on. So this is how we sort of grade them numerically. So in these sections, each D through H, each represents a trait that the Marine has showed during the reporting period. And you're going to then grade the Marine A through H on those traits. Now remember, A is going to automatically incur a adverse fitness report. So unless it's intended to be adverse, B is the lowest. And then H is going to be not applicable. This is going to be very common when you're giving a fitness report to your junior enlisted Marines and oftentimes your senior enlisted Marines, because they're not going to write their own fitness report, so you're going to have a not applicable for them. So other than that, you're going to have your other items in there. It turns out to be 13 traits if you have the report. If you don't have the report in there, and it's going to be 14 traits if you do have the reporting block in there. So that's going to come into play at the end when we sort of divide the total number. So 13 or 14. So what you're going to do is you're going to go through all the traits, and this is going to be an opinion here. This isn't fact. This is just my recommendation. What I prefer to do is I don't aim for certain scores. So a lot of people say, okay, I know what I want my average to be, so this Marine is average, so I'm going to build the scores around that to make sure he's an average Marine. I don't recommend that because it gets a little bit harder to kind of control. So what I prefer to do is I just look at the traits and I look at the associated scores and I put them where I feel that they are. So if I look at proficiency and I have a Marine who's extremely proficient at his or her job, they do their job very well. They're always doing what they're supposed to be doing job-wise, their technical skills are good, then maybe I look at the trait descriptions and I say, hey, they fall within like the E or the F category, and I give them an E or an F on their trait for proficiency. That's what I prefer to do. And then at the end is where maybe I'll juke them around a little bit. Maybe they got a really high overall score and you say, this really isn't that great of a Marine. Like maybe they're really good, but they aren't that great. Maybe you'll go back and change some of those things or reread some of the traits. But I highly recommend not going through and saying, okay, I want an average of a 4, so I'm going to give them between C's and E's on everything and then try to get them that 4. Really read the traits and what they stand for and then give an associated grade to that Marine. Again, my recommendation, not you figure out what you want to do with your reports. So you're going to give them grades based off of each trait and based off of the description of each letter. And then each letter is going to be associated with a number. So A being 1 and then G being 7. Each one of those is going to have, might be 8, could be wrong. So each one of those is going to have an associated letter with it. And then that's going to go into their final score. So when we start talking about the score of a fitness report, this is where you get the score from based off of their trait scores. And it's going to translate from the letters to the numbers. And we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. I just want to kind of introduce that concept here. So after the traits, you get down to section I. So these sections here, so these 2 green sections in the bottom, these are going to be the most important things on your fitness report because, and again, I don't have the most experience in the world. I've never been on a board before, a promotion board or selection board or anything, but I've talked to a lot of Marines that have been, and they always provide the insights of the board in normally a PowerPoint formation after the board lets out. So be sure you read those because that'll give you some good insight on what the boards are looking for. And it always, the relative value and section I is where those Marines get chosen or not chosen from. So ensure that this is, accurately depicting the Marine. This shows a good example of the Marine. Put a lot of time and effort into this. You should be doing that already. So section I, direct and additional comments. Make sure you read through the PES manual because there are going to be a lot of things that require directed comments. So if we start talking height and weight issues, if we start talking CFT, PFT scores being above or below a certain point, all those things come with required directed comments. So ensure that you are familiar with those, and before you submit your fitness report, make sure you look at the directed comment requirements so that you can put them in there. If it's a subject of commendatory material, make sure you put, directed comment, section A, item 6, then that they received a Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal for X, Y, and Z. So ensure that you put all the necessary directed comments in there, and then it's your time to sort of paint your picture of the Marine. So find whatever works best for you, but I recommend being consistent. It's really easy to sort of have a pattern for your fitness report. So what I like to do, and this is my own opinion, this is how I work it, but what I like to do with my section I is I want to start out with a statement that sort of tells how the Marine did during that period. So I might say, Staff Sergeant Johnson performed extremely well during this reporting period. That way, that first line is sort of a, hey, this is a really good Marine. Like he reported really well. He's done extremely positive things during this reporting period. That's sort of what I like to start with. You've probably heard of the phrase velvet daggers before, so make sure you read up on that or find some tips and tricks with that, because I'm not going to go too much into that. But remember, on fitness reports, we're not supposed to say negative items. So if a Marine is not great, if they're sort of the very bare minimum of a Marine, that in that first line, it might say something like, this Marine performed the expectations of him during this reporting period, right? So that sort of tells the board, hey, this guy kind of snuck along. So figure out how you want to do that. So I start out with that. I say this Marine performed extremely well, and then I'll tell some traits about them. So Staff Sergeant Johnson performed extremely well during this reporting period. He takes every opportunity to educate his junior Marines on the process of fire control system. He looks out for all of his Marines in a very individualized manner, where he takes a lot of time to counsel them and talk to them one-on-one. Whatever you want to put in there, that's your kind of time to do that. And then at the end, make sure you throw anything else that's required to include their recommendation for promotion and retention. So if it's an outstanding Marine, you might say this Marine is an absolute must for retention, and ensure that he is promoted at the very next opportunity, however you want to phrase it. That's your time to do it. And then, your directed comments there if you haven't put them in already. How I like to end my section I right before my directed comments is I like to say something about if I would work with that Marine again. So I think that's a really telling way to recommend a Marine or not recommend a Marine, is to say that you would work for them again. So how I like to phrase it is, if it's a really outstanding Marine, I'll say something along the lines of, I would actively seek out an opportunity to work with this Marine again. If it's someone I don't think that was that great, I might say something like, I would welcome a chance to work with this Marine again. And if it was someone who really was awful, I would say, or maybe I probably wouldn't say anything at all about working with that Marine again. So again, find what you want, find your rhythm, find your style. Definitely do whatever works best for you. That's just some recommendations, and something that works really well for me on my section I's. All right, so that's sort of your walkthrough. Once you proofread this, highly recommend sending it to a command review. So maybe your first sergeant who's probably seen a lot of fitness reports, or if it's not for your platoon sergeant, if it's one of the younger Marines in your platoon or in your section, then perhaps your platoon sergeant if they're pretty admin savvy. But take a look at how your unit wants to operate that. But highly recommend that command review, and ensure that you put a time limit on it. So typically about 3 to 5 days is a good recommendation. Say, hey, first sergeant sent you this fitness report for your command review. If you don't mind getting it back in 3 to 5 days, that would help me out a lot. Great, awesome, good work. Okay, so fitness report is done. You have it sent in for command review. Now, what does it all actually mean? So this is where we're gonna get to the second point here of relative value. So we talked about each trait has a score A through G, and each one of those letters is associated with a number. So if you gave all C's for your traits, then that Marine is going to have an average of 3. So C equals 3. So that Marine has an average of 3. So I like to use the whiteboards. Obviously, you can tell. So let's say he has an average of 3. Okay, that average by itself doesn't mean anything. And I can't tell you how many times I've had Marines come up to me, or overheard conversations where Marines say, so-and-so, he screwed me because he only gave me a 3 on my fitness report. And then I'll ask that Marine, well, what's your RS's average? And then Marine will be like, I don't know what you're talking about. What's an average? So then that tells me he doesn't really know if he screwed him or not. He just has no idea the value, the relative value. He just knows that he got a 3 score, okay? So in general, you can say, well, 3 probably is a little bit low, but you still don't know that without having an average to compare it against. So you got a report average of 3, and then you have to take that average and compare it to the RS's average for that rank. So let's say this was a sergeant. He got a report average of 3, and let's say Lieutenant Smith is the one who's writing the report. Lieutenant Smith's average is 3.5, okay? So now you know that Lieutenant Smith's average is a 3.5. The average on this report is a 3. So in that case, you can tell, okay, this Marine's average is below the average of the RS, which means it's going to be a below average report, at least at that time. It could change later on in the future, but a 3 is below 3.5, which means it's going to translate to a below average report. However, conversely, let's say that his average was a 2.5, which is a really low average, so hopefully that's not the case. But if Lieutenant Smith's average is a 2.5 and this report's average was a 3, well, now your report is above average. So yeah, you might say, oh, I got a 3, that's really low, but since it's above the average, it's still going to be a pretty good fitness report, at least at the time of processing. So make sure you understand relative value and understand what that means, not only as someone who might get a report, but when you're reporting on your Marines, because they might not understand it. It's something that, if you don't get kind of talked about to, then they won't understand that process and what relative value really means. So ensure that's kind of understood, and they know, where they kind of fall out. When you're giving your fitness report debrief, ensure that they understand where they fall out. Don't just say, okay, I gave you a 4 on your report. Have a great day. Well, that Marine has no idea how good they did because all they have is a number they don't have any comparison for. So keep that in mind moving forward. Some tips for the scores. A lot of people have preconceived notions of scores. We sort of talked about that already, where they want their average to be. And that's okay to sort of keep that in the back of your mind, but I certainly don't recommend shooting for averages or scores and try to figure out and play the game and say, oh, this Marine was okay, but I want to leave some room for better people and all this stuff. Like, give them what you think they deserve, right? So go through the traits, and if they fall out and they got all E's, then that's great. Like, give that Marine some E's. There's some room to improve on E, so don't think that there isn't anything to improve on. Specifically for lieutenants out there, if any lieutenants are watching, one of the things I always caution people on is don't fall in love with your first Marines. So it's very typical. You're gonna have a platoon sergeant that you think is an absolute rock star, and I hope that it is. I hope that your platoon sergeant is the best man or woman that you've ever seen on this earth. I really do. Sometimes it's the case, sometimes it's not. I myself had an outstanding platoon sergeant, but I've seen some not so outstanding platoon sergeants before too. So it may be the best, they may not be. But I always caution lieutenants is don't fall in love with your Marines for the first time, because you have a very limited perspective of how Marines are and how they compare. And what I always see happen is if you have a really outstanding Marine, you tend to kind of put those scores towards the top with the E's and the F's. And later on in your career, you kind of realize that Marine really wasn't that great, but you put them so high, it's really hard to rank anyone higher than them. And so that could do pretty good damage on your profile. So just keep those things in mind, but really when you're doing with the traits and the scores in these sections, highly recommend just looking at the trait and read through the associated letters and see where they fall out. So if they're just outstanding proficiently, they're the best at that job as a Marine, then great, give them that EF score. And if they're not great, and give them that BC. And maybe later on, they might fall a little bit short. So they might be the most proficient Marine, but maybe not really good at developing subordinates. So that E in proficiency might get counterbalanced by a B or a C in developing subordinates. So just keep that in mind for the traits. That's a really big part of this, because again, talking with everybody that I've had the opportunity to with regard to boards and promotion boards and selection panels and all those things, this section here, along with section I, that relative value and the section I word picture, that's what's going to get a Marine promoted or not get them promoted. So ensure you take time to do that properly. All right, and then O to the RS. This is going to be the last part of your RS duties, in addition to your fitness report counseling, which isn't a counseling tool, right? Your fitness report should just be more of a debrief. Hey, this is what you got, this is where you fall out. But back to O to the RO. So beyond section I is going to be your J and K, and this is where your RO is going to put their comments in, and then the Christmas tree. So I'm not going to get too much in the RO. I have limited experience as an RO. I've only RO'd a few Marines before, but you should all be familiar at this point with the Christmas tree and where they fall out on the RO profile. And then section K, very similar to section I, this is where you give the word picture of the Marine from the RO's perspective. Things that I like to do, sometimes your RO, or the Marine's RO, so it's probably your RS, will tell you what they want out of an RO worksheet or out of notes, but if they don't, some things that I always like to incorporate. I would tell the RO what your average is for that rank, what the report average is, and what you kind of think of the Marine. So let's just go back to the original example. Let's say the average is 3.5, and this report was a 3, I would say, okay, Sergeant Johnson is a 3 as a sergeant. My average is a 3.5. That's going to drop him out below average. I do believe he's a below average Marine. Here are some reasons why, and then here's some recommendations for your comments as the RO. Conversely, let's say that your average is a 3.5 and this Marine got a 4.5 on the report. Then you might say, hey, my average is a 3.5. The report average is a 4.5, so he's going to be significantly above average. This Marine has done outstanding work during this reporting period, and here's some bullet points of what I prefer for you to say in your RO comments. So a lot of times the RO doesn't get a chance to see the Marine very often, so they're going to rely on the RS's comments or the recommendations for their comments because they might not have a chance to really see that Marine too often. So ensure you do that, do a good job so that you can properly take care of that Marine, and then after that, once the fitness report process is done, please provide that fitness report debrief with your Marine. You can rope it in with your regular scheduled counseling, but remember, fitness reports are not supposed to serve as a counseling. But ensure you sit down with that Marine and kind of explain, here's some things we think you're doing well. Here's some things we think you can improve on. Here's where you fall out on my profile. And by the way, we've got another 6 months together, before I leave or before you leave. So you got some room to improve, and there's a lot of room there to sort of improve your profile. So those are going to be my RS tips. I could go on for days, especially about relative value and how to work that, but just be honest with yourself and with the Marines and give them what they deserve, not what you want your profile to be. And that's where we're going to take care of our Marines. So as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them down in the comment section or send us an email. And I appreciate your time, and have a great day.